up guys, welcome back to another reaction. This is a reaction to Lost in the Pond, and the video is Americanisms I've picked up since moving to the USA. And I mean, I do a lot of language / speaking related videos. I always find them quite interesting, and people always seem to enjoy those kinds of reactions as well, sort of letting me know certain things, correcting me, and just having a general conversation in the comments. It's just quite fun to sort of see the differences in ways people speak. And again, I've done a lot of these videos before, but I don't know if I've done an Americanisms related video. And I mean, yeah, we're just going to check it out really. You're going to see his point of view on this subject. And I mean, yeah, links are in the description to my Instagram, my Twitter for those who want to follow me. Same for Patreon, links are there for those who want to see extra reactions that may get blocked on YouTube, or just specified reactions to series, etc. Also, links are to this video and to obviously Lost in the Pond, to Lawrence. Go show him some love if you haven't seen this video already. Give it a like, all that kind of stuff. But let's just jump into this, man.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Distant Words with me, Lawrence Brown. So, living in America for the last 10 years, a question I often get asked is, have you started to adopt any kind of Americanisms over the time that you've been living here? And in the past, I have covered in a video some of the words that I've picked up and maintained throughout, and I'll be talking about some of those today. But there are other aspects, of course, of American English that you can adopt, such as spelling or pronunciation, things of that nature, and just other quirks in general. So that's what this video really is all about. It's those Americanisms I've picked up during the 10 years that I've lived here. So without further ado, let's get underway. So I have done a more comprehensive video on some of the American English words that have stayed with me during my 10 years here, or at least that I've accumulated over the time. But there are some others that I've thought about, so I thought I'd just add them to this particular video and we'll go from there. So when I first moved to the United States, it became apparent to me early on that, ironically, the word acclimatize is not in such wide use here in America. You will find usages of it, but it's more likely that you're going to bump into the word acclimate, and I assume...
What? Acclimatize and acclimate? So acclimatize is obviously how I say it and how British people say it. Acclimate? I've never even heard that word in my life. That's kind of interesting. I would have thought that would have been a universal word.
Became acclimated to that very word myself, and I think nowadays I find myself using it more often in conversation than I would acclimatize. Possibly because it was one of the first Americanisms that I noted after moving here.
But I guess my question is, if he may have already said it and I just probably didn't listen, which was a very big issue with me in school, to be honest, so yeah, nothing's changed. If you said acclimatized in the US, I'm assuming people still know what you meant, but I guess acclimate is just a word that is used in general conversations by the majority of people, I assume.
So I wanted to make sure that I was saying the correct thing to be understood. So that was.
He says that maybe people don't understand it as much in the US.
Those that stuck with me. Another one, and you'll find that a lot of these words are to do with practical everyday usage. But the word gas, gasoline, which, as I've pointed out in a previous Distant Words video, was originally coined in Britain, but it stopped being used there in favour of petrol, right? And is the predominant usage here. You go to the gas station to get gas, or to pass it. In my case, that could be dangerous, mixing methane with... Never mind. It sort of became a sort of everyday phrase, you know, when we lived in Indiana and we had a car, should we get gas? Let's go to the gas station and fill up. So after a while, it sort of stuck with...
That one, I can understand that. That would make just... Your daily life would just be easier. If you said petrol, it would just be confusing. And it's probably quite an easy one to sort of learn as well. And
similarly with the word trash, it's a routine everyday activity to take out the trash if you're being diligent about it. That. Let's not get into that. And so because it just becomes part of the everyday conversation, you know, and you have to end up saying. Early on, of course, I think I would, opt for rubbish, as it were. But over time, you do start adopting some of the everyday terms that Americans might use. I don't know if it's to avoid confusion or anything like that, or if it's just sort of... after hearing it repetitively from other people, you do take it on, and it's almost unavoidable.
I wonder how it is when he comes back to the UK. Does he use the same Americanisms when he comes to the UK? I say he's with his family. He's using the Americanisms of the words that, like, instead of rubbish, he says trash, etc. That would be pretty funny to see. Like, I wonder how that would be.
Not that I wish to avoid it. I have no plans to avoid adopting American English, but occasionally it is going to happen that you do adopt these American terms because it's your new life. You know, it is the new language, the lingua franca with which you've become familiar, and that's true of other everyday activities like going to the bank. You know, I say checking account now instead of current account, liquor store instead of off license. You know, not to suggest that I drink alcohol every day. Don't get that impression.
I saw that he's had, I think, a year from drinking alcohol. I saw on his Twitter. So keep going, Lawrence, man. I love to see it.
I'd rather give you that impression.
I think that was
all the time. And, you know, filming every day here in my apartment. It's becoming a rare occurrence that I would actually say flat these
I
days.
mix between flat
just
and apartment.
because this is where I live every day, and it is a word that emanates from my mouth rather often. I'm going back to my apartment, or do you want to stay in the apartment tonight and get a Chinese takeaway? You know, that's the same across the board. Not in terms of the content of the food, though. That's another video for another time, but in the meantime, let's move on to how we're actually saying the words, because that is a whole different ballgame.
Pronunciation.
So during the process of putting together the list for this video, I realised that I pronounced the word process as process, and I think that when I lived in the United Kingdom, I would have been far more likely to, and in fact I did, pronounce it process. Yeah. And that does tend to be the predominant pronunciation of it back in Britain, though, you know, there could be exceptions to where people do say process, and vice versa, where people in the United States say process, but the predominant pronunciation here of that particular word is process. And so the thing is, in the workplace in the United States, process is a word that comes up quite a lot because you talk about processes that you have to adhere to.
Is it the same with like progress and progress? So I say progress, but I guess it's the same sort of idea. Like, I guess in the US it's progress, right?
And so I hear all of my work colleagues saying it that way, and I've over time adopted it, especially when I have to speak to clients over webinars and things of that nature. You just start picking up that particular way of speaking. A lot of the words on this list came my way, I think, because of the workplace and because of the sharing of these particular sounds. Presentation is another one.
What?
Presentation would have been...
Presentation? Is that actually how it's said? Like in the general sort of pronunciation? Presentation? That sounds so different. Well, it is, but holy shit.
My sort of go-to back in England, but I never really had a job back in England that necessitated the constant usage of the word presentation or presentation, so I never really said it that often, I don't think, in the workplace.
Usually in
but
school.
It's sort of an everyday occurrence where I work now, because I have
and you've got to do a presentation in front of the class.
Presentation of webinars, and I tend to go with the American pronunciation because all my colleagues are doing it.
Yeah,
Another everyday word that it was pointed out to me I pronounce in the sort of more traditionally American way, and this is quite a subtle difference, is the word insurance. I put the emphasis on the instead of saying insurance, which is what I would have used to have done back in England. But here's the thing, you know, I've grown up in America more or less. My adult years have been spent here for the most part. I mean, I was 26 when I moved here, but still in those early sort of 20s, you're still figuring things out, and insurance is not necessarily a word that is a big part of your vernacular, I suppose. And so I think that moving to America, that word became more of a constant thing, and therefore I learned the American pronunciation of it, or rather I adopted the American pronunciation of it. It's not that I never used the word insurance, but I barely used it compared to now, because I have things like health insurance and previously auto insurance and things of that nature. So that's one of those where, you know, I've adopted the American pronunciation just because there's been a massive increase in the number of times that I use that word here. There's another word that fits that bill, and that word is YouTube. I tend to go back and forth on this one. It could be YouTube if I am sort of...
Wait, so is it actually said different as well? What?
Thinking about it, or YouTube if I'm just speaking quickly. Of course, it's more of an American tendency to say
YouTube.
Tube or Tuesday or things
I'm always like YouTube, like UCH tube. That's the sort of shit that's gonna get me, bro. I don't know, like I love seeing the like on Twitter, like people joking about British accents. That's a specific thing, like tube, stuff like that, man. Instead of tube, it does make more sense to say tube because it is literally tube, but Tube, yeah, fucking man.
That nature. Whereas back
Why not?
in England we would say YouTube. But of course my YouTube career, as it were, took off while I lived in the United States. I didn't have the connection with YouTube that I have now. I just said YouTube there, so I was obviously paying more attention to it. But you know, something I've learned, I think, about language acquisition and acquiring these sort of American English tendencies is it often comes down to necessity or repetition. And speaking of YouTube and speaking of just the workplace in general, a lot of the time that requires, of course, to create your own schedule. And notice there I said schedule and not schedule. This is something that a lot of you have pointed out over the years of doing these distant words videos.
I don't really know what I would say. Schedule. I'll probably say schedule. I think schedule, like if I'm actually thinking about it, schedule is what I'd say. But schedule just seems nicer to say and easier to say.
But that comes up quite often. And the truth is, I don't really remember ever pronouncing it schedule. I know that there is a British tendency toward doing so, although you will also find instances of schedule back in the UK. I think the thing is, a lot of us aren't sort of aware what the British tendency is, or we're not sort of aware that there's any kind of pronunciation.
I mean, I'm not.
You'll find British people that certainly pronounce it the American way. So I wanted to just address that, because people have often mentioned that I pronounce it schedule. And again, I think I always have, unless I can find an old video that proves me wrong on that. But one word's pronunciation that I certainly have amended since I moved here, and it's a weird one, it's not one that you would think of, it's the number 4. So I worked in a call center when I first moved to the United States, and you're often reading back numbers to the customers that are calling through, and it quickly became evident to me that a lot of times when just hearing it on the phone, people didn't understand the word for if you're not putting an R in there. Obviously, largely speaking, there's an American tendency to roticize the word for and put that R on there.
For.
And so over time I found myself inserting...
So if you say for, like for this, for that, is it not as understandable?
An R into that word and other words as well. Water is another good example.
Water, that's the big one. Water. To be fair, my grandparents, I've said this before, my grandparents used to always be like, try and say water, but I don't know, it's just one of those things, man. It's easy to just say water. Just miss out the T, it's just forget about it. I'm too lazy to use the T.
Sort of changes that pronunciation on a context-dependent basis, because water is, weirdly enough, one of those words that often stumps waiters in restaurants if I pronounce it the British way, because they're so used obviously to hearing water. And the thing about water and water is there's a lot of sort of sound differences in there. So firstly, you've got the first vowel sound is slightly different, and then the second consonant sound, Americans have the tendency to substitute the T sound for a D sound, whereas we would be less likely to do that. We might even drop the sound altogether as a glottal stop. And then, of course, that final consonant sound, the rhotic versus non-rhotic pronunciation. So it's one of those words that's so short, but it has 3 sort of differences, generally speaking. I mean, obviously there are varieties across both America and England as to how to pronounce that word, but it's one of those that I've had to amend when I go into restaurants, because you get that blank look from the waiter until you...
That'd be so funny if I go to the US one day and I'm speaking with the most British sort of way possible, and I'm like, can I have some water? The faces that I would get, oh man, that'd be funny though.
Yourself having to spell out the word, and that's not good for anybody. But speaking of spelling out the word, that brings us on to spellings. Now, I think, unlike anything else on this list, spellings are certainly context dependent. So if I'm typing to people back in England, then I think subconsciously I continue to use sort of my British English varieties of spelling. But again, I think in the workplace, I think while doing sort of freelance work for American publications, things of that nature, sometimes when I'm even typing to some of you in the comments below, if I happen to know that you are American, I think subconsciously I go American. Certainly in the workplace, I purposely go American English. It's something that I consciously do, and there are certain words that come up in the workplace quite often. So I might be typing to a colleague about the kind of font we want to use and the color of that font. So I would spell color C-O-L-O-R and drop the U. I might tell them to center align the heading, so I'll spell center the American way. And it's not that, you know, part of you's thinking, oh, they won't understand me if I put RE. It's not really that. It's more to show that you are cognizant of those differences and to professionally apply those differences, to assimilate, basically, so that nobody really questions it. And especially as someone who's a writer in the workplace, you want to be able to show yourself to understand language differences and write to a particular audience. So that's something that happens. And, you know, in the workplace, you have words like incentivize and all manner of different words that have that IZE ending. Notice I still say Z, so there is that. But that IZE ending, I've more or less universally adopted that way of spelling. I don't think it really matters who I'm typing to now. But certainly in the workplace, there's a lot of those kind of words that come up because words ending in I's tend to sort of fit corporate speak and all of that. So, you know, I type a lot of those and I definitely go with IZE. But a little word on that. I think when I lived in Britain, I was never really sure of British English's rule, whether it was ISE or IZE. So I think I went back and forth between them all the time.
Same as me. I don't actually think about it. I don't know how I do it. I think I do just change. Constantly just changing how I end the I's sort of words. I actually do. That's probably very not the best way to go about it, but I don't give a damn.
When I lived in Britain, but since moving to the US, it's more or less always now that I will use the Z in words like that. And another thing to just mention, I think while I was researching for this video, you know, it came to my attention, or rather I was reminded of the fact that words that end in IZE versus ISE, they constitute the vast majority of spelling differences between British and American English. There's absolutely a ton of them. Because there are just so many words, of course, that have that ending to them. You know, some of the technical writing that I do in my everyday job involves healthcare. A lot of the sort of British English spellings of certain medical terminology retain some of those old Latin influences. So you've got words like esophagus that begin OE, as in kind of like phoenix, right? Whereas in American English, predominantly anyway, those usages have been dropped. Words like esophagus are spelt just with an E at the beginning, ES. And one word in particular that I happen to deal with on a fairly routine basis at work is pediatric. And that's a word that in British English we would spell PAED at the beginning instead of just PED. But again...
PED is probably... It does just make more sense. Like, why would there be an A and an E? It's the same with another word. I've had, like, loads of words. We have AED. And it just makes more sense to just have ED.
It's a word that I didn't really use all that often back in England. I had no cause to. And the only reason I do now is, as I say, it comes up in sort of the technical writing that I do at work quite often. So I've just learned, really, a new spelling. And this is a spelling that I use quite widely now, along with certain other health words. And so that's a word that I happen to have learned the American way, and along with a lot of other medical terminology. And I dare say that, you know, if ever I were to move back to the United Kingdom, it would take a long time to break those spellings, if indeed I ever did break them. I mean, there could be professional reasons as to why I'd have to, but yeah, I mean, that's the adoption that I've gone with.
Dates.
Okay, and finally a word on dates, and specifically how you order the date when you write it out.
So we have it day, month, year. Yeah, we have it day, month, year. Isn't it in the US month, then the day, then the year?
Month and then year, or month, day, and then year. Well, obviously, growing up in England, it was always the day first, then the month, then the year. In fact, one of the nerdiest facts about me is that when I lived in England, my date of birth, 18th of the 11th, 81, is a numeric palindrome, same forward as backwards. I always loved that fact.
Oh, shit, that's pretty cool.
Relinquish it when I moved to the United States. But the truth of the matter is, it took me a long time to get used to writing the date the right way. All your life, you've written it the way that I just alluded to, and then you suddenly have to change the way your brain thinks about that. And it took a long time. I think in the last year, I finally gotten used to the American way of doing things, and so now it's quite instinctive for me to write it month first, then day, then year, to the point that recently, when applying for a new British passport, I had to fill out all the details, and it asked me for the date that was on my previous passport. I had to type that in, and I just kept getting it wrong. It couldn't accept the 17th as a month of the year, for obvious reasons. There aren't 17 months, right? And I kept realizing, oh no, it's the other way around, you fool. So that was tricky. I think it's forever going to be a battle. I mean, again, if I move back to Britain, I then have to undo what I've learned in America. So small problem to have, I suppose, but it is just one of those interesting things that I've noticed because, like I said, I've talked about this before in articles and here on YouTube that I think back in the day, even just 2 years ago, I was still having problems committing that order to memory. And so I'm finally there, and we can all enjoy the fact that as I'm filming this, because it was yesterday, it is the 2nd of the 2nd, 2019, or is it the 2nd of the 2nd? I think I got it the wrong way around. Thank you for watching. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for watching this episode.
For God's sake, man. I love these videos. They're so intriguing just to see like the differences. I'm American and I use grey and grey. Yeah, I think I probably do as well interchangeably. There are a lot of interchangeable words, to be honest, that I do use. In 7 decades as an American, I've heard and used insurance much more than insurance. So insurance, and I just go insurance. When he said what, when he said water the American way, he sounded like a completely different person. Like, that's the word that anyone can say and they'll sound American because it's such a like specify. That's not even the right word I'm looking for. It's so specific to America, like water. It just sounds American no matter what way you say it. We say takeout, not takeaway. Oh yeah, that's true actually. I like saying rubbish when someone says something that I disagree with and I'm from Texas. Oh, you're talking rubbish, mate. Yeah, that makes more sense than saying you're talking trash, mate, to be fair. But yeah, fun little video. Hopefully you enjoyed. Like I said, links are in the description to his channel. Show him some love if you haven't subscribed to him already. Give him a like on the video, all that good stuff. But yeah, until next time, like, subscribe, peace.